Maintaining high ethical standards is extremely important in social research as it protects participants and researchers, improves, of course, the quality of the data retrieved, and ensures that future researchers will have access to participants within the community. So being ethical is vital for the production of good quality research and for avoiding damage also to the field. Ultimately, the well-being of participants and researchers should always be put before the success of any project. If you do research that is not ethical, risk harming patients, for instance, yourself, and putting people off participating in future research. So today we will discuss on many topics. I would like, of course, your collaboration. We have plenty of time, so we can dedicate some time for discussion, especially when it comes to some ethical dilemmas, because I want also your opinion and your point of view. Because when we talk about ethical issues, sometimes there's not right or wrong. It's not up to us to judge this, but I would like to have a constructive discussion with you. So if you allow, I will start my presentation. I will share my presentation. Is it visible now?
Yes, ma'am, it's perfect visible.
Okay. Actually, the term ethics derives from the ancient Greek word ethos, which means character, and research is this collective and systematic search for new knowledge. New knowledge using different scientific methods. Research has intrinsic value as a source for new and better insights, and is, of course, precious and valuable to society. The purpose of research ethics is always to promote free, reliable, and responsible research. Research ethics contributes to fostering good scientific practice. So research ethics consists of a set we consider scientific norms developed over time and institutionalized in the national research community. We talk about the truth norm, which is very important to all scientific activity because it is the search for truth, the commitment for truth, for integrity and honesty, and preconditions for quality and reliability in research. Research is also based on methodological norms such as accuracy, factuality, transparency, and accountability. These norms usually dictate the scientific methods that must be used in a responsible, always manner. Furthermore, research is, I would say, regulated by institutional norms, which guarantees that research is open, is collective, independent, and critical. So together, all these norms constitute a good scientific practice and foster integrity in research. Research ethics also consists of common norms derived from society's demands and expectations to research in a wider sense. So human dignity, we could say, is the core value in this context. And it is protected by three principles: respect for equality, for freedom, and autonomy, beneficence, and protection from the risk of significant harm and unreasonable burdens. Of course, justice in procedures and the distribution of benefits and burdens. These norms ensure responsible research. So ethical principles, we talk about respect, beneficence, all this action for the good of the participants. No maleficence, do not harm participants. Research merit integrity and justice. This means that all participants should be treated equally. So people must be respected, benefits must be maximized, and harms minimized. Some principles of research ethics have to do, first of all, with voluntary participation. This requires that people should be participating voluntarily. The process of collecting information from respondents requires also informed consent, which means that prospective research participants must be fully informed about the procedure and the risks involved in research and must give their consent to participate. We're going to discuss about this because there are many issues when we talk about informed consent. Furthermore, ethical standards also require that researchers not put participants in a potentially harmful situation. Harm can be either physical or psychological. This means harm caused by actual conduct of research, such as mental distress, or harm arising from the publication of research outcomes. So for those reasons, ethical standards put emphasis, usually the focus on protecting the privacy of research participants. Ensure the participants' confidentiality. This means that their assured identifying information will not be made available to anyone who is not directly involved in the study. So the effective control and administration of these ethical rules means that there needs to be a procedure which ensures researchers will consider all relevant ethical issues, including guaranteeing respondents' privacy when they formulate research plans. In order to address these needs, most institutions now and organizations have established one or more human research ethics committees. It's actually groups that review research proposals with respect to ethical implications. There are those who decide whether additional actions need to be taken in order to ensure the safety and rights of participants. And in practice, we could say that the ethics committees try to protect both the organization and the researcher against potential litigation and try to take into consideration all important ethical issues. So this committee consists of usually of members from several different disciplinary backgrounds. It is formally independent of university government influence. Ethics committee members should be autonomous and must have no possible conflict of interest, of course, concerning the proposals that they are judging. To ensure probity, the committee is regularly monitored and is accountable for its decision. Now, research methodology in social sciences, it's very interesting to talk about participants' observation. Of course, ethical issues are becoming a crucial element in social research. It is compulsory for a social researcher conducting research involving humans to apply for ethical clearance. The ethical principles set out in usually national statements state that all research involving human subjects should be conducted in accordance with what we said, respect and justice. So participant observation is where researchers join in with a group being studied and observe the behavior. And this participant observation is closely related to what we call ethnographic method of ethnography, which consists of a more in-depth study of the way of life of a group of people. And we talk about ethnography, which is associated with anthropology. When an anthropologist visits a foreign land, he has access to a group and spends several years living with them. The ethnographic method involves watching what participants do, involves listening to them, try to engage in conversations, joining them in day-to-day tasks if it's necessary, and it also involves investigating any cultural artifacts such as artwork or any written work if it exists, as well as analyzing what religious rituals and popular stories can tell us about the culture. So ethnographic research has traditionally involved taking copious field notes. And the difference between participant observation is that it includes the writing up of a detailed account of our findings. So ethnography is participant observation plus a detailed written account of our findings. What are the strengths of participant observation? First of all, the most significant is the high degree of validity the method achieves. And for instance, you can observe what people do, not what they say they do. In contrast to most other methods, participant observation allows researchers to see what people do rather than what people say they do. It's very important. Participant observation takes place in natural settings. This should mean that the respondents act more naturally than in laboratory, for instance, or during a more formal interview. This should mean that, for instance, the Hawthorne effect will be less, especially with covert research. We're going to explain what is covert research. So we'll also get, we could say, a more close feeling for respondents' actions in context, which might otherwise seem out of place if we were in an artificial research environment. This gives us an opportunity to dig deeper and gain insight. So it's interesting because it enables the researcher to dig deeper than with other methods and find out things which may be hidden to all other means of inquiry. And of course, sympathetic understanding, because participant observation allows the researcher to fully join the group, to see things through the eyes and actions of the people in group. Joining in also allows the researcher to gain empathy through personal experiences. And this closeness to people's reality means that participant observation can give unique, personal, authentic data. Flexibility in generating new ideas, because when we complete the questionnaires, researchers begin with preset questions. Even before starting to collect the data, the researchers have decided what is important. So the problem with this is that what if the questions the researcher thinks are important are not the same as the ones the subject thinks are important? By contrast, participant observation is much more flexible because it allows the researcher to enter the situation with an open mind, and as new situations are encountered, they can be followed up. Also, there are practical advantages. Researchers using questionnaires to research, for instance, street gangs. This has to be seen this way. He's seen as an authority figure and unlikely to be accepted. I mean, participant observation is one of the only methods that can give us access to certain groups, for instance, drug users or prisoners and things like that. Ethical advantages: it allows respondents to speak for themselves and therefore avoids what we call a master-client relationship, which we get with more quantitative methods. What are the limitations of participant observation? First of all, is the low degree of reliability, because it would be almost impossible for another researcher to repeat, given the fact that the participant observation study relies on the personal skills and characteristics of a lonely researcher. Another disadvantage is a low degree of representativeness, because sociologists who use quantitative research methods study large, carefully selected representative samples that provide a sound basis for making generalizations. In contrast, the groups used in participant observation studies are usually unrepresentative. Why? Because they're accessed through what we call a snowball sampling, and therefore they're randomly selected. Critics also question how valid participant observation really is. They argue the method lacks also objectivity, because it is very difficult for the researcher to avoid subjectivity here and forming biased views of the group being studied. And also, researchers usually decide what is significant, what is worth recording, or what is not worth recording. Therefore, it depends on the values of the researcher. In extreme cases, we could say that the researchers might go native, as we say, when they become sympathetic with the respondents and they omit any negative analysis of the way of life, but in extreme cases. A further threat validity is what I said before, Hawthorne effect. Hawthorne effect is when people act differently actually because they know they're being observed. Of course, participant observers try to face this, to cope with this by saying that people usually can't pretend for long. They can't keep up an act over a long time period, so they will eventually relax to be themselves. But it's actually a threat because we all know that when we are being watched and observed, we cannot be ourselves. Also, these methods lack a concept of social structures such as class, gender, ethnicity. So by focusing on participants' own interpretation of events, researchers tend to ignore the wider social structures, which means giving only a partial explanation. And if we talk about the practical disadvantages, this method tends to be time-consuming and expensive in relation to a relatively small amount of respondents. It can take time to gain trust and build trustworthy relationships. It can may take several days or weeks or even months before the respondents really start to relax in the presence of the researcher. Participant observation also requires, of course, interpersonal skills and observational skills that not everyone possesses. So you have to be able to get on with people and understand when to take a backseat and when to probe for information. Gaining access can also be a problem because many people will not want to be searched this way. This way researchers are limited in this case. So overt and covert observation. Covert observation, this is what the group being studied know that they are being observed. And covert observation, where the group being studied does not know they're being observed. Or what we say, the research goes uncovered. So these both, of course, have the strengths and limitations because overt research is obviously more ethical because of the lack of what we call deception. We're going to discuss a lot about the deception. And overt research allows the researcher to ask probing questions and use also other research methods. On the other hand, covert observation may be the only way to gain access to marginalized groups. It may enable us to gain fuller immersion into the host culture, for instance, and avoids the Hawthorne effect I mentioned before. Ethically, of course, it involves deception, and it can be very stressful for the researcher. But there are some, on the other hand, some advantages. We can say of overt compared to covert observation. When we talk about overt observation, might be a better choice. Sorry, here. Better choice of research because you can ask probing questions, you can combine it with other methods mentioned before, you can take all the role of what we call professional stranger. What it means professional strangers, that respondents might tell you things because they know that you are not one of them. It is less stressful and risky for researcher and is easier to do follow-up studies. What is happening now with covert observation? So much, it's a very we could say, hot debate in this field of research methodology in social sciences. Several difficult issues have arisen the application of this of covert research. The first issue is that it is still not certain whether or not it is ethical for social science research scholars to cover research on this, because according to some experts, covered research is appropriate when it is necessary to achieve a better understanding of certain social phenomena. What I mentioned before, for instance, if we wanted to have a fuller immersion in the life of drug dealers, of drug users, and investigate their social life, of course, we know that it's impossible to ask for informed consent from members of such communities because, of course, they do not want to be investigated. It has also been argued that the act of seeking informed consent from for some research participants can lead to a change in the attitude of the research participant towards giving information to research. This is understandable and normal. Others say that it is a necessary social research. Others say that covert research may have a negative impact for researchers, because they say that as long as respondents trust the researcher, there is no need to conduct covert research. And there are also others who say that covert research is likely to invade the privacy of the respondent to an unacceptable degree, and that using covert research makes social science research not different from journalism. So this kind of debate, and we'll discuss about this later. We said before these advantages of overt research, and now we can see the disadvantages of covert participant observation. The problem of taking field notes, you can't use other methods. This is more stressful, and there are ethical problems that you have to deal with. Example, I have mentioned already some examples of covert participation. For instance, when we're doing a study on football hooligans, or for instance, we investigate racism, or we're making documentaries, for instance, on the violent gangs, and cases like this. But the advantages of covert participation and observation is, of course, that we gain access before, especially to closed groups. It's much easier because the researcher does not have to seek for permission. Another issue now is what we call, of course, bureaucracy, and the role of researcher as a participant observer. The main concern is that the researcher should be neutral, in order to stick to this aim of objectivity in the research project. So in research experience, where the researcher also acts as participants, he or she must normally develop and maintain close relationship with the community members. So some ethnographers say that this close relationship between the researchers and participants of this kind could lead to conflict and deception. So researchers may find it difficult to make objective judgments in the research if they are personally connected with their respondents. Another issue has to do with vulnerable groups, because in most ethical clearance processes, the social science research category vulnerable group refers usually to children and young people, people with mental health problems, and people with learning disabilities. So usually ethics committees ask for special consideration to be given to vulnerable groups because they have difficulties in providing initial and continued informed consent to conduct research. This concern has led to an insistence on more complicated procedures to protect the interest of such groups. And furthermore, some social researchers have argued strongly against defining such groups as vulnerable or incompetent, on the grounds that it makes researchers more likely to exclude them from research and therefore to provide them of the benefits of research. This is a very good argument. So these researchers insist that it is unethical to exclude people from research on this basis. And researchers also, particularly in the area of child research, they say that judging someone as vulnerable can have a negative impact on the focus of research and the ways in which it is conducted. So this means that we need to find ways of obtaining consent from individuals that is meaningful to them, regardless of their abilities. So all I have to do with informed consent, it covers a range of procedures that must be implemented when our study includes human subjects. Human subjects in our study must be informed about the nature of research project, and we must obtain, of course, the consent prior to the participation in our study. So this information is usually contained in an informed consent letter that each respondent in our study needs to sign. And by doing so, respondents indicate that they have read the letter and agree to participate in a research project. The informed consent letter and the ethical dilemmas in social research. Here is what are the guidelines for informed consent letter. First of all, this lets respondents know about a project, what role they will play in it. A letter should be detailed enough so that the participant is informed about the specific nature of the project, including any potential risk, and the letter should outline how participation will make a contribution to our project goal. It is important also for participants to weigh any potential risks with the benefit of their participating in our study. We should make sure that participants can follow up with questions or concerns that may have about our project by providing them with information on whom to contact about the study. We need to be sure that the study participants know that their agreement to participate is completely voluntary and that they are free to opt out of our study before, during, or after their initial participation. We need to be clear with them exactly how we will use the data we collect from them. We must also be sure to let them know the degree of confidentiality afforded to them once they participate. And so this is very important. You might let participants know the specific ways in which, for instance, we will ensure the confidentiality. You might inform them that their name will never appear on any data collected, and that instead you might provide a unique identification number of the data, and that this information will remain secure. This is very important because informed consent is actually a question of basic human rights. It is intended to safeguard participants from any mental or physical harm that might harm them as a result of their participation. So participants are made aware of any potential risks that come with participation and know that procedures are set in place to deal with any negative outcomes that might ensue. So in this regard, it is crucial that we build into our study the specific steps that we will take to minimize any potential risks that may arise in the study. So beyond now ethical, beyond informed consent, what are the ethical dilemmas in social research? Although the principles of informed consent may be relatively clear, we all know that the actual practice of ethics in a given research setting can be very complex and may pose a number of fundamental ethical questions that the researcher must navigate, often without clear guidance from a given set or ethical codes. A discussion of some of the kinds of ethical issues that may arise in qualitative, especially social science research, may serve as a guide to thinking about these issues. Some researchers, for instance, say that the research must be conducted in a covert manner to obtain information they need to understand certain social phenomena, what I said before. Some researchers have gone undercover to study underground cultures, such as drug cultures, and use deception to find about the inner workings of the social life of drug takers, often observing individuals engaging in illegal activities and sometimes finding themselves asked to engage in these same activities. Of course, there is no need to ask for informed consent of the members of this closed society because they would most likely not want their organization study or the participation study. So this it's one thing we mentioned before, and there are some questions that we need to formulate. For instance, is it ethical to go undercover to study this marginalized group? What does the researcher do when he or she confronts information or situations where individuals are observed engaging in major violations of the law? What we should do then? Is a researcher ethically obligated to report such activity? Another issue, what about the risks the researcher is taking in terms of his or her own life in doing so? So deception in research doesn't have to happen only by doing undercover in carrying out a research project. A big case, I think, is with the Milgram experiment. We're going to see about this. What happened during the Second World War. The deception is something which we could say it is inherent in participant observation. For instance, if we talk about field studies, wait a minute. If we talk about field studies, then, for instance, a field worker has gained entry. People tend to forget that he's there. He seems to participate. He's really there to observe. Even he watches what happens when people don't know. So he's involved in personal situations in which he's emotionally speaking, always taking and never giving. He's there to learn, so to take from the people he studies, while at the same time they are always giving information to learn. So take from the people he studies, and these people are rarely being giving anything. Of course, sometimes they feel some satisfaction from being studied, but when they ask the participant observer to give, for example, help or advice, he must usually refuse in order to maintain his neutrality. There are these kind of questions. A field worker can require a more subtle type of deception between the researcher and the researched, even when the field workers disclose the fact that they are conducting research and its nature to those they are studying. Another case is the objectivity. We said before, the case of objectivity. Experts usually criticize this model of neutrality, and they argue for bridging this divide through empathy and affinity. We can see that issues of disclosure here and trust are actually very complex. Some people may argue that a certain amount of strategic deception is needed when researchers are especially interested in studying something in very deeply. And remember something, that the study of the elite groups, which is common practice within the social sciences, that the elite and semi-elite populations, those who hold the key positions within society and their activities and power remain invisible to the average citizen, elites often protect the privacy through million ways, through million barriers. So you can understand here that this is the difference of what we said before about the marginalized groups. So elites pose many ethical questions here. So we need to talk about ethic codes because usually these elite groups have created their own code of ethics. And we need to know the difference between ethical value and ethical code. Of course, we need to follow some ethical codes, but beyond ethical codes, which were created by humans, maybe they were created by these elite groups, we must always put above ethical values and not ethical codes. So powerful groups can hide the mechanism of control, and this way research won't be, of course, objective. So the idea that researchers should remain neutral and detached from the research subject tells us that it's not possible always. So we want to overcome ethical dilemmas. We talk about now technology. How another chapter now, very, very interesting, we discuss about this, how do new technologies in social research impact the practice of ethical research? What is happening here? For instance, we talk about all this social media. Suppose that you wanted to understand how users of an internet community, such as Facebook, present themselves to their friends. You may begin by content analyzing their online profile, looking for the type and range of information they provide about themselves or what they have listed as their interest or their taste in music. Facebook groups, they have joined the types of pictures that they have posted and so on. So after looking at this data, as you are, as a social researcher, decide to use this information that you have collected from a range of Facebook users to create a series of profiles of these people you intend to contact later, based on the information that you have got from this public website. So what do you do in essence? In essence, you are using some type of profiling, we could say, which may be based on one's gender and race. And then you go on to categorize Facebook users and begin to make generalizations about the gender and race that appear to reproduce traditional gender and racial stereotypes. So some possible ethical issues that relate to the collection of data this way and how we categorize our analysis. Before this, you can think about these questions. Did these users give you permission to take personal information? They posted the personal profile for research purposes. We talk about public data which are displayed publicly. But did users give us permission to take this personal information? Does the fact that this information is public and accessible make our use of this data acceptable? Is contacting users for a future research study without their consent is also something which is ethical? Without their consent is ethical. So these are very important issues that we need to take into consideration. So if we can take this example a step further, supposing that we are conducting research on drinking patterns among college graduates, and you're using Facebook profiles and pictures to gather data to identify a sample of college graduates, those who drink a lot and those who don't drink. You may look through photos of individuals and place them in categories, for instance, consumption or non-consumption, based on the presence of alcohol in 5 or more of their pictures. So can you use actually this data for a valid study? How do you ensure this its accuracy? For example, someone who is no consumer, or if these photos are fake, are just exhibitionist photos. Is this a privacy violation if the subjects are underage? All this leads to big question. How does a researcher conduct ethical research, and how does a researcher distinguish between public usable information and private information? I think these examples are very illuminating. If we go further, we can mention the case of someone like Communities or, for instance, MySpace, because researchers could use this information presented on the internet and social network communities, arguing that this is presented on the public domain, that they do not need consent to use information as presented. They don't need to contact the individual in question for further interviews or for further inclusion in a research project. But we need to ask ourselves, to what extent can one verify the validity or accuracy information on these sites? Should the researcher inform the individuals of the inclusion in research? How does one then establish a definition of informed consent in working with this information? This is means that researchers need to consider whether they are mining social network databases for large-scale samples or using individuals as their main source of data for education of elucidation of findings. So it's all these very useful examples. For instance, if we want to make research on social working of MySpace, for instance, for a research study on teens, in this case, we need to be very, very careful. Overcoming ethical dilemmas of social science and social software technologies. This question should be formulated that is there only minimal risk of harm? Are the integrity and autonomy for research studies adequately secured? Is the method adequate? Is the knowledge produced relevant enough? So integrating ethics into the entire research process, from selecting the research problem to carrying out research goals and interpretation and reporting research findings, is critical to ensure that the research process is guided by ethical principles beyond informed consent. And here is the problem. Beyond informed consent, there are so many ethical dilemmas that we need to handle. These are real challenges for researchers because we need to become aware of the range of ethical dilemmas we confront in carrying out daily tasks of any given research project. An important step beyond securing informed consent lies in the researcher engaging, first of all, in self-reflexivity. Self-reflexivity means that we ask ourselves, what is our ethical standpoint on the research process? What type of ethical principles guide our work and our life beyond the professional code of ethics that we are bound by through a given discipline or professional association? Where do our ethical obligations to the research start and end? Knowing our own ethical standpoint as researchers is an important internal guide and compass, we should say, as how we can proceed in our research. It's interesting here you can see Michael Patton provides an ethics checklist to take into account as you proceed with your own research project. Here you can see the table. It's a checklist, alpha self-reflection, how we'll explain the purpose and why the methods to be used. We have access to the data, what kind of informed consent if there is, what are the reasonable promises of confidentiality, how hard will you push for data, who will be the researcher's confidant and counselor, matters of ethics, and what ethical framework or philosophy lies behind your work. So here, if you talk about developing countries, is another big issue. Debate with science relating to issues such as COVID research I mentioned before, or regulation of vulnerable groups. Letter of consent, of course, has become important. And there are many concerns for social researchers when they conduct field work in developing countries, because usually these include the lack of experiences when they have to deal with bureaucratic ethic procedures, the need for cultural sensitivity, security concerns, and the consequences of administrative and political practice in developing countries. So careful consideration is needed in the application of ethical approval, which often cannot be applied universally in developing countries. Complex ethical issues in such countries need careful justification by researchers. The same happens with international students. National students, usually in a great number from developing countries, undertake postgraduate programs, for instance, social sciences in other countries. Of course, as they conduct their projects, they have they're obliged to apply for ethical clearance from the university prior to data collection, such as interviews or administrating questionnaires. So these questions I mentioned before is that in some developing countries, there are no comparable ethical committees as they are established in developing countries. So for many international students, the informal management process is a great challenge. So may contribute to the national PhD students' difficulty in obtaining clearance from the ethics committee. Another big issue is the cultural sensitivity. This means that the research procedure applied in developing countries may not be appropriate on ethical ground in developing countries. So cultural sensitivity needed to be taken into consideration in such instances. It is not necessarily a matter of adding layers of regulation to achieve the necessary sensitivity. It's not about this. In some places, some local people are reluctant to sign consent forms because in their culture, signing a formal paper is impolite. It's not considered something acceptable in their traditional culture. And another big issue has to do with security, has become a crucial issue for the national students collecting data, conflict, and ethical standards require that the participant should be able to answer questions freely during the interview. So particularly in conflict areas, due to security concerns, it is likely that the researcher will be accompanied by police or the army. I had some friends, researchers, who told me about this recently. We were on a trip and they were accompanied for the study by the police and the army in order to obtain data. So being there is something which being accompanied is unavoidable. The researcher has to get a letter of permission from the local authorities, such as local government or police department. And this presents a dilemma for researchers conducting fieldwork in such conflict areas. Because on one hand, researcher has to be accompanied by representatives of the security forces to obtain an interview, and on the other hand, the researcher has reason to fear what? That participants will not speak openly in the presence of police. So this is another ethical dilemma. So we talk about all these issues, and now another example of ethical reflection. I like to talk with examples. Is, for instance, a study that I read recently. It was an interview. Some researchers interviewed elementary school children and related this, given take the mentioned before, they engaged into a process of understanding the lives of these youth. So they highlighted the importance of creating an what we call ethic of relational narrative inquiry that goes beyond the requirements of signing, of course, a consent form, because this means we have developed a more profound interpersonal relation. So this means that this creates another big issue because we don't know if something like this is ethical. We don't know if creating a profound interpersonal relation with students or children, this would be ethical for research and the objectivity of research. These issues go beyond informed consent. Of course, bureaucratization, mentioned before, bureaucratic barriers exist all around the world, in all countries. Ethical regulations also are not easy to face. Researchers have raised concerns that increased ethical review is causing problems. And reduces their ability to make their own decisions about ethical issues regarding their specific projects. So now it's we talk about now an example, the famous example in the history of research has to do with the Milgram experiment in 1963. It was a research project which concerned the obedience to authority. Milgram wanted to understand the conditions under which individuals obey authority figures, and his research protocol called for deceiving volunteer subjects into thinking that they were involved in experiment on the impact of punishment on memory. So one great example in order to think about all these ethical issues. Now we could ask ourselves how we can observe ethical values in our research practice. Ethics exist within a social context. So the ethical dilemmas serve to remind us of the importance of including an ethical perspective in the very foundation of our research project. So ethical rules cannot possibly account for all events that may arise in a given project. So ethical guidelines do not begin to cover all of the ethical dilemmas that we may face in the practice of social research. This means that we cannot achieve ethical research by following a set of pre-established procedures that we always be in contact with. Of course, there is a requirement to behave ethically. It's very strong in qualitative interviewing, as in other types of research. But we must build ethical routines into our work. So this means that we should carefully study codes of ethics in cases of unethical behavior to sensitize ourselves to situations in which ethical commitments become particularly salient. So throughout our research, we should keep thinking and judging what are our ethical obligations. By agreeing to comply with ethical codes, a researcher is not absolved from adhering to the underlying, as I said before, ethical values. Ethical values should be placed above ethical codes. So if we talk about one question, what are the two main categories around which most discussions around ethics in social research involve? The first one could be the use of informed consent and the possibility of harmful effects on research participants. And what are some forbidden processes in the conduct of social research? In general, there are 6 forbidden processes in the conduct of social research. First of all, what we call coercion. There is what we call the exercise of undue pressure to induce a subject to participate when he or she would rather not. Deception, or misleading a subject on what the study is all about. Invasion of privacy or intrusion into matters that the subject would rather keep to himself or herself. Breach of confidentiality or permitting information about individual subjects to be passed to others. Stress or the psychological difficulties of participation in study might cause. And of course, collective inquiry or risks and harms that the study might cause to others. So this is very important. And remember something that we talk about another the relation between researcher and sponsor. Research is an expensive activity. We all know about this. Researchers do need sponsors to support the research. So these sponsors could be some private foundation or corporate body or public agencies, including the state. However, public and private agencies that finance research are inclined to support a project that conform to their interests and values. In academic circles, it is generally assumed that a researcher in his role as a paid consultant or academic entrepreneur is prone to distortions of social research findings. Why? Because usually such researchers compromise their ethical responsibility by overlooking the implications, the consequences of their own research. So over the years, we know that the state sponsorship has exercised great minds. Academics have been guarding their autonomy from the state. They have been wary of the inherent danger that the state-sponsored research occasions, socio-political values of the establishment that are likely to intrude the entire research exercise. And at the time when social research is beginning to be disseminated to a broader public and have come to influence public opinion in unprecedented ways, this way they lose their ethical and political neutrality. Of course, this means that we cannot avoid state or funding, but we should admit that social research is fairly dependent on the state funding. Protect researchers from sponsors' pressures and respecting their autonomy to follow intellectual academic pursuits have been recurrent dimensions of the debate on ethics in social research. Now, another issue has to do with ethical concerns about big data sets. I have here, I think PowerPoint is not the correct one, unfortunately. Anyway. Another case is ethical concerns about big data sets in social science research. Before this, we can give you another question. If you want, you can write in the chat. Do you think it is appropriate, for instance, to ask prisoners to take part in a research study? Why? Why or not? Or can ethics, politics, and epistemology be separated? What do you think of this? Questions like this. So in another case to talk about, we are in the age of big data. So in recent years, research community has witnessed introduction of new technologies that collect and process big data. So social scientists have particularly benefited from these developments as their research increasingly then generates big data sets or reuses existing ones, such as those collected by public institutions and federal agencies. With the increasing use and reuse of big data in social research, there are new ethical concerns that are emerged that need to be recognized, that need to be communicated to the research community and mention research ethics guidelines and protocols. It's interesting to say that literature reviews show that big data do not discuss ethical issues, mostly claiming that the data were publicly available. So, as I said before, when we take data were publicly displayed, usually we avoid ethical issues. In order to explore these ethical issues of big data in a systematic manner, we employ usually the normative framework developed in David Resnick Ethic of Science. This framework consists of 12 principles: honesty, carefulness, openness, freedom, credit, education, social responsibility, legality, opportunity, mutual respect, efficiency, and respect for subjects. All 12 principles are relevant to big data. If we want to explore more this, we could say that these ethical issues have to do with bias. The principles of honesty and carefulness, risk relating to publication and reuse of big data. These are the principles of openness and efficiency, and ethical concerns about individuals and societies. The principles of social responsibility and respect for subjects. So we have two types of biases here. First one, framework. So this Resnick framework allows us to make a distinction between these two types of biases. One type might be embedded in methodologies and techniques used in research processes, what we call methodological biases. And the second type is related to researchers' personal values or worldviews or preferences or used language. Given what I said before about the weakness of the big data analysis methods, making a distinction between these two types of bias helps articulating ethical issues more specifically. And these two forms of bias are discouraged by the principles of honesty and carefulness. So honesty, talk about honesty means that scientists should not fabricate falsity or mispresent data or results. Carefulness, this is the framework of Resnick I mentioned before. Carefulness, scientists should avoid errors, research, especially in presenting results. Openness and efficiency, they're very important. Openness, scientists should share data, results, methods, techniques, and should allow our scientists to review their work. And efficiency, this means that the students should use resources efficiently. When it comes to using big data, the principles of openness and efficiency are not only connected, but also they're inseparable. We could say they are both relevant to exploring the risks of big data publication and reuse. While openness of data enables efficient use of resources, for example, data reuse, efficient use of resources requires also openness of data. And this Resnick's framework is developed with the recognition of social impact. So this is also related to respect for subject, social responsibility, and all this chapter about prejudice and biases. So recent developments in the big data generated technologies have opened up new possibilities for social scientists. Prejudice and biases not only hinder researchers' adherence to the principles of honesty, but might be so subtle that even the most diligent researchers might be unable to neutralize them. So while researchers have more control over methods used to generate original datasets compared with reusing existing datasets. They cannot always identify biases introduced by technology they employ. Of course, these difficulties is presented in all kinds of research to a certain degree, but the volume of information, big data sets, make researchers' dependence on technology greater while reducing at the same time their control over technology's impact. Therefore, this exacerbates ethical issues. This means that employing data sets that were generated with the help of technology, social scientists might be facing specific ethical challenges regarding bias. Depending on the states where third-party technology is used, their inherent biases might corrupt data collection, study designs and analysis, for example, lack of considerations for relevant characteristics of respondents. In order to articulate some of these biases, we use usually what we call self-tracking and crowdsourcing platforms. As examples that we all know that are employed in social science research, as examples that complicate researchers' adherence to principle of honesty. In some contexts, like psychology or anthropology or sports, researchers employ automated data collection devices, self-tracking device mentioned before, used by research subjects to explore movement or health and productivity. But these data collections are not always accurate. Therefore, resulted conclusions might not be as objective and unbiased as they appear. And research shows that self-tracking devices cannot always reliably detect particular kinds of movement, which leads them to underestimate activity metrics. So even if self-tracking devices could capture all possible movements, their designers might categorize and understand this in ways different than researchers. So, for instance, devices from two different manufacturers might provide altogether different results for the same subject, even in measurements seemingly uncomplicated, as, for instance, step counting. And the issue becomes even more pronounced when complex parameters such as the differences between, for instance, light and deep sleep are considered. The objectivity and accuracy of such results cannot always be fully trusted. Of course, the collected data lack contextual information because researchers might be unable or might be unmotivated to examine and disclose contextually relevant information that impact the data sets. For instance, even though self-tracking data about geolocation, physical activity might be highly beneficial for a study that investigates people's mobility and public health risks, such data may be not necessarily provide all the contextual information required to make accurate conclusions about the study cohort. Algorithmic bias and limitations of third-party technologies remain mostly undisclosed. So it's another case. Users and third parties, financial, no financial conflicts also is another issue. Low financial rewards offered by most crowdsourcing platforms increases the chances of obtaining biased data sets. Crowdsourcing platforms such as, for instance, Amazon's Mechanical Turk are regularly used by social scientists to generate big data sets. So when crowdsourcing platforms are used, financial incentives offered to participants, for instance, a payment per completed survey, and the lower cost of data collection for researchers might not only contribute to, but also encourage unethical practices. So research subjects might decide to increase the profits by completing surveys hastily to maximize completed surveys per day, or researchers might exploit subjects by not fully informing them about the required time for completing a survey. And And also for concluding, it's interesting to mention, to see here the National Committee for Research Ethics, a case study of in Norway, the National Committee for Research Ethics in Social Sciences. There are these important guidelines. The free independent research, researchers shall enjoy individual freedom and have real independence. In accordance with good scientific practice and recognized research ethical norms that should be free. So individual freedom, institutional autonomy are preconditions for research integrity related to scientific norms such as compatibility, honesty, and openness. Academic assessment of student papers, dissertation, applications, publications should be characterized by openness, factuality, and integrity. Researchers must be willing to consider arguments and modes of thinking that are recognized in other research traditions and be conscious of the limitations of their own competence. The co-authorship, researchers shall respect the contributions of others and comply with recognized forms of co-authorship and collaboration. It means that everyone who has contributed significantly to the project should be offered the opportunity to participate in the further work towards publication. Fabrication, falsification, fabricating or forging research material or results is incompatible with good scientific practice, of course. That could be fake sources or fictitious data or deceptive descriptions. So falsification refers to misleading manipulation of materials. International collaboration, of course, research communities international, especially to the COVID pandemic, and all the collaborative platforms that we can leverage. Impaired capacity to consent, when research participants' capacity to provide consent is impaired or absent, researchers have a particular responsibility to safeguard the freedoms, rights, and human dignity. Exceptions from the demand for consent, transparency, always about role and responsibilities, and of course, confidentiality. Researchers should handle data confidentially when it has been agreed upon or otherwise, of course, is advisable. Direct and indirect involvement. Future generations, researchers have responsibility towards future generations, also respect for cultural differences in research on culturally defined groups, respecting and gaining knowledge about the local context and social relations is important. So culture is understood in a broad sense that includes subcultures, religious groups, and minorities. Public offices should enable independent research on their activity data. So public administrations is another guideline in this framework. Independence in research, independence is a precondition for the credibility of and for societal trust in research. Transparency about funding, roles, and interest. All research actors are responsible for securing transparency about funding and interest. Publication ethics, scientific publishers to promote norms of research ethics. Dissemination as an institutional responsibility. Research institutions should facilitate dissemination of research and other forms of dialogue interaction and dissemination of factuality. The demand for factuality is the same in dissemination as scientific publication. And finally, participation in public debate. Researchers shall bring, of course, scientific results, methods, and attitudes in the public discourse. So I would like now to end my presentation because I think we can start a discussion if you have any question and if you have thought about the questions I mentioned before. For instance, if it is ethical to involve, to conduct a cohort research among marginalized group, or if it is ethical to involve prisoners, or if it is ethical to use data from social media platforms, or if all this data we take from artificial intelligence and machine learning are actually accurate and valid. So I would like your opinion on this, any question, and
Dear participant, session is open for discussion. You can unmute your question if you have, or either you can put your questions in the chat box also.
Of course, there are many other ethical dilemmas. If you have something to share from your own experience, I have only mentioned some of them, but you can share. I told you about the experience of my colleagues who went in another country and they had to be accompanied by the police, for instance, in order to obtain data. So culture also is important. Field worker. Yes, Mr. Becker.
Very
I think
much.
that's right.
Thank you very much, Dr. Is it Prof. Lampou? How
Yes.
to add Lampou? Okay, thank you very much. This was actually very, very interesting, but unfortunately, I only joined very late because of electricity. Our country has issues with electricity, so I missed more than half of your lecture. But so I'm not sure if what I'm going to ask you covered in your session or not. But my interest was what happens in a case where you advertise, maybe you ask a permission from the administrator of a group to advertise to put your advertisement for your research, and then they allow you and they put your advert on their group where you're going to attract participants, and participants contact you directly thereafter. Would you view that as unethical?
Yes, actually, it's a great question, and this has to do also with ethical committees always. Here in Greece also, I'm writing some projects for schools, and the main ethical clearance is that we should not relate this project directly or indirectly with advertisement. So, for instance, I can tell you a very extreme case. I'm writing some robotics projects, and the high officials told me that the materials are bought by a private company, so we can't advertise this project. It was very extreme because all the materials are from are coming from private companies. So my whole robotics project was postponed, was cancelled. I think that there should be flexibility in all these issues, if you want my opinion. In this case of ethical dilemmas, as I said before, we can't say that something is wrong or is not wrong, is ethical or unethical. But we need to be flexible in order to carry out, finally, and implement our work. This is my opinion, this case of dilemmas.
Thank you. That's quite interesting, I must say. I'm also wondering now that, like, just in addition to the question, now you get interested participants, they contact you directly, and you realize that some of the participants is people you know, because possibly you were in the group as well, and have some relationship with the people.
Yes.
How do you move on?
Yes, it's what I said before, that when we have a profound relationships, what we call narrative inquiry, this is called in research, this causes problems because subjectivity cannot be compatible with an objective research.
Correct.
It's always the threat of subjectivity. So we need to avoid this type of, relationships, or even what I said before, even if we start by not knowing our participants, but throughout our research, we get more connected. Even this is a threat for the objectivity.
Interesting. Thank you so much for valuable response and the presentation. It was quite interesting. I'm happy that it's being recorded, so I'll be able to go through it again. Is there a chance for people to contact you directly if they have more questions?
Of course, yes, you can. I will write my mail here
Right.
in the chat, and you can text me. You can write me.
And any research available on this, because I think this on its own would be very important, interesting research or article if it's going to be a peer-reviewed article. Do you have anything that you can share with us? Maybe your work, so we can also, read through and maybe even cite you if you want to.
Right, it's important to search for guidelines such as the case I showed at last. It was the guidelines from Norway. Very, very interesting guidelines. We start from these guidelines and then we go further with more specific ethical dilemmas.
Lovely.
But
Thank you. Thank you so
guidelines,
much.
Yes, anybody from the audience side who want to ask any query, any questions from our respected ma'am?
What is your opinion about marginalized groups? Yes, how we can conduct the research among drug users or drug dealers who will not give their consent? Yes, who wants to?
Hello, good morning, madam.
Good morning.
It's a wonderful presentation. So I have a question about use of artificial intelligence. So you can now use artificial intelligence to generate background of the study, literature review, and so on. So is it ethical to use the AI, or there is ethical issues about using of the artificial intelligence? I just want to know.
Yes, because I mentioned before a lot about big data, and there are always prejudices and biases. So this causes many, many problems. Of course, it helps us with big volume of data, which are more controlled, but it poses many problems. Why? Because they take this big data from public or social media platforms. It's what I said before. Is it ethical to take information from a Facebook profile of someone? No, of course, they will tell you that these data are there, public. But is it ethical? Because it has to do with private information. It's privacy of someone. Of course, they are public data, this information. The same happens with artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence takes this kind of data, which are not ethically appropriate. This is the problem. That's why now there have started, I think from UNESCO, has started to formulate specific ethical guidelines when we use AI in all fields, at all levels, not only in education, but also at all fields. This started from UNESCO. I think it was a meeting in Beijing. They have written a very nice report. You can find it on the internet. And since then, there are many ethical guidelines that are formulated in order to control this overwhelming processing of data. So if you want my opinion, we need to be cautious when we use artificial intelligence and this kind of tools.
Dear participant, if you have any more question, please you can unmute your mic and put your question. You are permitted to unmute your mic. Ruchita ma'am, I think there is no more question.
Yes, sir. I think the lecture was very much great. It was good presentation by the ma'am. So I think audience is already satisfied. So ma'am, I am very thankful to you on behalf of the entire audience that you have given such a precious guidance on the very prominent and important issues, that is ethical issues in the social science research. Madam has widely stated that what are the principles of ethical research. Madam told us about the informed consent, what are the various dilemmas in the research, and how we can overcome these dilemmas. These are very well explained by the ma'am, and we are highly thankful to the ma'am for such a great and nice presentation. And now, on behalf of this entire team, we give the certificate of appreciation to the ma'am. Ma'am, this is a certificate of appreciation from this side. We acknowledge and honored your contribution as the keynote speaker in this great international FDP. And we are very thankful to you for such a great insight on such a good topic.
Thank you so much for this great opportunity, and I hope it was a constructive constructive topic, and also an incentive to an invitation for our researchers here to search more and explore more this very interesting field. And of course, I would like to thank Dr. Michael Chanta for his honorable invitation.
Thank you, ma'am, for your valuable time. And this talk was really very informative, knowledgeable for all the audience participants who are enjoying this session, and all those people who showed their interest in this ongoing faculty development program. And I hope that this session is really very wonderful and enjoyable, informative to all the participants. Along with I would like to ask to all the participants, please open your webcam for having the short screen as a group memory. Please open your webcam. I request to
Yes.
all the participants.
I want to say also something that
Yes,
until
ma'am.
very recently, it was only the field of biomedical sciences which actually cope with these ethical issues. Social science research were not, didn't deal with these kind of topics and ethical dilemmas. Very, very lately, social science research has started to deal with dilemmas. It's always about physical health or mental health, biomedical health. But now this is a field which has started to be growing more and more. So it's an opportunity for you to get involved.
Thank you, ma'am. I request to all the participants, please open your webcam. Thank you to all. The feedback form for this session will be shared on your WhatsApp group shortly. And tomorrow we will join the meeting at the same time. Thank you to all, and thank you, ma'am, for your valuable time for this session.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So it is time to close the session.
Okay.
Have a nice day and stay connected. Thank you to all.
Thank you, ma'am. It's a very nice,
Thank you.
interesting lecture.
Thank you to all. Merchant especially.